Hang on one second. Hey everyone, welcome to Land Week. Kicking it off on a Monday. Uh, really excited to have everybody here. As you come in, the chat is open, so drop any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll get to them over the course of the presentation. Our keynote speaker today is Seth Williams from RETipster. How are you, Seth?
Hey, I'm doing good. How's everybody doing out there?
So
Good, I hope.
for everybody joining in, having Seth be able to kick this off this week is an amazing win for all of us. Seth, I don't think I told you this. I was talking to Jaron Barnes the other day. Jaron
Yeah.
Barnes runs the Land Maverick Society. He's going to be our presenter, our keynote speaker on Wednesday, and he said, "Oh, you have Seth coming in? That's fantastic. He's like the godfather of REI content or land content and education." So, not sure if you knew you had that moniker, but even the gurus are looking to you for advice on education.
Jaron is very kind. Thanks, Jaron.
So everybody, just I mean, I'm sure that you read all of our marketing material all the way through, but just in case, if you didn't, the idea behind Land Week is we're doing a full week of land investing oriented workshops where we were able to recruit some of the biggest names in the business to come in as subject matter experts and really help guide us. So whether you're looking to stand up your land business from zero or you're looking to really optimize and gap fill your current processes, this is going to be a really great educational process along the way. So, stay tuned today, sign up for the ones coming up later in the week, and the whole set of modules is going to be a really great resource for y'all to have for your businesses. All right, so Seth, I'm going to hand things off to you. Mastering self-education and streamlining success as a land investor. Take it away.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us here for about an hour. Good to be here. Glad I could be part of this. And yeah, some folks here are probably veterans who have been in the land business for a while. So what I'm going to talk about here today will probably be a review for some folks. Some of you here may be totally new. Maybe you're looking at land as an outsider, wondering if this is for you, wondering about what kind of opportunity is available here. And hopefully I can have something for everybody. So I guess we'll just kind of kick this thing off here. So some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today, excuse me, is first of all, why land investing at all? Like, why are we even thinking about this? Why is this a good business model? Why does it still work today in 2025? Just top to bottom. Also, how to self-educate effectively. And this is pretty important because some people getting into this, they may be coming from the house flipping, house wholesaling world. Maybe you've never been in real estate at all. You have no idea what's going on. But I think all of us, to some degree, have to learn how to self-educate. Even if you're going through a course and there's a nice structured curriculum to follow, there's still a bit of self-education that kind of has to happen, because I think a lot of the real learning doesn't really start until you just start doing this and you start realizing, oh, that's how it works. There's only so far that like a course or a coach can take you until you just start doing it yourself. And even when you do get into it, there's a lot of voices in the room now. There's I know back when I first started RETipster, I was like one of a few people in the world that talked about land. And now I think there's like 30 or 40 different educators out there coming from different places with different opinions and different perspectives on how this business works. And it's not that any one of them is right or wrong, but it's important to understand, I think some of the perspectives in terms of like where they're coming from, some of the biases that some people might have. It's really easy for different voices to just kind of make big sweeping statements, but there's a lot of like hidden nuance to it. You want to understand what's going on underneath that, what presuppositions are there when people are saying things. So self-education is a big deal, and I've done plenty of this myself. I've helped a lot of other people self-educate, so I can speak to this pretty well, I think. We're also going to talk about understanding which property types to look for, which markets to look in. These are things that can really set the tone for a lot of what you're going to experience after you get started, how easy or difficult it ends up being, how much competition or lack thereof you encounter, how much money it's going to take to take step 1 and 2 and 3, and also spotting problems before you buy your first property. I think this is a huge topic that can be kind of boring to talk about. It's really due diligence is what it boils down to, but pretty much all of the worst nightmares that anybody encounters in the land business usually comes from a lack of due diligence or just not understanding what to look at and finding out about something when it's too late. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So what you're going to see here on these slides, they're really kind of just my notes. It's nothing fancy, but let's just get started with why land. And chances are, maybe you've heard some of this. So again, some of this will be review, but I'm going to go through some of the reasons why I think land is an awesome property type to go after and why the land flipping business model is just amazing. Even today, after the land business has changed quite a bit over the past 3 to 5 years, it remains a pretty great opportunity. So take a quick drink of water here.
I was just talking to somebody the other day on a podcast, Seth, and I said, like, I don't understand how people get through these things for an hour or more without drinking water. Like, you got to hydrate on these things,
I know. My problem is I drink too much coffee and not enough water. So like I get all dehydrated middle of the day. So that's where I'm at right now. So first off with land, I think just in general, the seller, when you find a motivated seller to buy land from, they're just coming from a very different place than somebody who owns a house. And one of the reasons they're coming from a different place is because there's less emotional attachment. And part of this is because a piece of land is a piece of dirt, and it's not the roof over somebody's head. It's not the place that they grew up. There's not like tons of memories and emotional baggage attached to it in most cases. It's something that I don't want to say it's not useful, but it's like it's less useful because it's not critical to anybody's life or well-being in most cases. So when you're talking to somebody and making them a lower offer on their piece of property, doesn't mean they're going to say yes, but there's less emotional baggage tied up with most pieces of vacant land. And also because it's vacant land, there just tends to be fewer people problems because there's no people living in it. Unless you have a squatter or something like that, which is kind of a rare circumstance. But aside from that kind of situation, when you buy a piece of vacant land, you don't have to evict people. You don't have to kick a family out into the street. You don't have to do any of that stuff. And what we're talking about here are people problems. And unless you're planning to do some kind of like improvements to the property, which a lot of people don't do, but unless you're trying to do that, then you also don't have to worry about like general contractors and subcontractors and people showing up and doing what they're supposed to do. If you buy a piece of vacant land with the plan to just resell it at a higher price, there's just not that much going on in terms of people problems. Another thing is, and some of the people who have been in the land business are going to scoff at me when I say this, but even in 2025, I think there is less competition out there than houses and many other, investing niches out there. I can definitely say this for some of the other ones I've been involved with, like self-storage, for example. And don't get me wrong, the land business has definitely gotten more competitive. It's probably more competitive now than I've seen it maybe ever. So I don't mean to say that there's no competition. That might have been true 15 years ago. I don't think that's true today. But compared to things like house flipping and house wholesaling, the return on ad spend that I have been hearing and seeing from a lot of house flippers out there is usually somewhere from like 2 to 4x, whereas the return on ad spend for land investors is more like 5 to 15x. And a lot of this depends on property types and specifics of the market you're working in and what your marketing even looks like. So there's a lot of variables that go into those numbers. But even today, I think there is less intense competition compared to the world of houses, which is what most real estate investors are thinking when they get into real estate investing. So I also think land is much easier to manage from a long distance because pretty much all the information you're ever going to need to know about a property before you buy it, you can get without having to physically travel to that property. And this is a huge deal because it basically means you can do this anywhere in the US. It doesn't have to be a place you can drive to. It doesn't have to be in the same state that you're in. Just as long as you can get the information you need to make these critical buying decisions, things like what's the topography, and is the property going to perk, and well, what's on the property, what's around the property, how big is the property, where is it situated, all this stuff you can find out fairly easily with free or very inexpensive due diligence tools that we can all get access to fairly easily. And this is a huge deal because we don't have to get keys to a lockbox to open up the door and get inside a house and see it and smell it and all this stuff. None of that stuff we have to think about. It's just, what does it look like from the road? What does it look like from the sky? Do we see any wetland areas on it? That kind of thing. And this doesn't mean that you can necessarily only rely on these online tools. They definitely have their limits, but even when they do have their limits, you can find local people, local boots on the ground to visit the property, drone pilots, local realtors who can give you a lot of this information to fill in the gaps in order to make a buying decision. And this is way easier to do with land than it is with just about any other type of property out there. I also think it is easier to start on a smaller budget compared to most other things that require loans and a lot more money for marketing and that kind of thing. And I do think the budget depends a lot on what your marketing strategy is going to be and what types of properties you're trying to buy, how big they are. And also if you're planning to buy properties at all. I mean, you could get properties under contract and assign them or double close on them, that kind of thing. But just generally speaking, when you look at what it takes to get into the land flipping business, it's just not as much as what it takes for just about any other type of business out there, real estate or otherwise. And I think it's kind of thing where if you don't have the cash you need to get into it, say if it's like 10 grand or something like that, and not everybody has 10 grand, but if you really wanted to make a point of getting that money, you could probably save up for a little bit and get that. Whereas if you're talking about a startup budget of like 200 grand, like a lot of other, business opportunities out there, that's just way out of reach for a lot of people. So the land business is a nice opportunity from that standpoint. Questions? Anybody? Michael, anything before I move on?
No, I popped a couple comments into the chat. Yeah, I mean, we have the data to back up what you're saying. Like the distressed property market still has quite a bit more competition than land. So you got open fields there, and just the feedback. Then, and I think Adam can even talk to this, but the feedback that we get from our subscribers on the kinds of conversations that you have with the landowners versus distressed property owners, it just goes a little more smoothly. Not to say that you aren't going to get your occasional kickback from somebody who doesn't want to be called or doesn't want to be texted, but in general, it's a gentler conversation and an easier one for you to kind of just be yourself on that call and use that as a way to create a really good connection with the seller and get a deal out of it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's good to know the data seems to agree. So getting into the whole concept of self-education. So I think it's actually never been easier to get a free education on the land business. I mean, there is so much information out there now, so many podcasts and YouTube videos and, a handful of other blogs out there. There's just a lot of data out there. I know back when I was starting this, none of this stuff was out there. I mean, basically either had to learn it from a course or you had to just kind of fail into success and try something and it didn't work and it blew up in your face and you learn that way. But now there's just a plethora of information out there, which makes some things easier, but it actually kind of makes it a little harder too, because, while there's never been more information, I think it's also never been more confusing to know what to believe or to, know that you're getting the full story behind what you're hearing. Not that this is ever done like maliciously necessarily, but for example, some of the lessons that you'll hear out there may have been put together like 3 or 5 or 10 years ago. And it's something that's still being said as if it's a fact today. And I think, what the main thing to be aware of when you do this kind of thing is whatever you're learning from, whether it's a YouTube video or a blog post or a podcast episode or whatever it is, check the date on it. Just understand, like, okay, when was this said? Because this thing that is being said may very well have been true, 5 years ago, but might not be entirely true or accurate today. And I think especially over the past like 24 to 36 months, a lot of stuff has changed in terms of expectations, like how much mail it should take to get a deal, things like cold calling and texting and that kind of stuff. It wasn't something people even really did 5 years ago. So like you didn't even hear it talked about back then. And luckily, I think, with most YouTube videos and podcasts and all this stuff, you can see the dates. It's just a matter of paying attention to that. Like when you see a comment or a post in a Facebook group or a forum, like all these things have dates on them. So just pay attention to that. If you see that the date is 2 or 3 plus years ago, then just start taking it with a grain or two of salt. And also just knowing that a lot of times when you see or hear podcast interviews or videos that focus on a certain land investor and their success story, it's also important to know that the success stories are usually what gets the airtime. That's what people want to hear about. That's what's exciting. That's what's fun to hear about, is how a person accomplished something. I totally get that. Nothing wrong with that. But the stuff you don't necessarily hear about is like the ugly underside of that. Like what other stuff did they have to go through to get to that end? Like what other deals went bad in the meantime while this one awesome deal came to fruition? Because there's always more to the story, and you probably aren't hearing that. And I think this is a really easy thing to start getting discouraged by when you see somebody posting their giant check in a forum or Facebook group and talking about this huge success they had. And it's kind of discouraging when it's like, man, I didn't have that success. Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, am I screwing this up? Like, what's my problem? And I would say there's probably nothing wrong with what you're doing. It's just that you're hearing one side of the story. That's just an important thing to remember. And I think it's also important to know that, it's kind of funny. Not every time, but a lot of times when I hear or see somebody talking about like how amazing they're doing or how amazing this business is, or kind of just almost being like, I guess, hypey for lack of a better word. A lot of times when you follow it to the next step and the next step and the next step, the reason they're acting so, amazing about it is because they've got something to sell. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's a little bit of bias in there, I think, when somebody has something that they want you to buy into, whether it's an idea or a course or a coaching package or whatever it is, it serves them best to talk things up and say how amazing things are, when not that they aren't, but like there's probably more to the story too. And usually the most honest, I think authentic conversations that I see in different groups, that kind of thing, are from people that have nothing to sell. Like they're just sharing because they're trying to be helpful, that kind of thing. So again, not trying to like take anything from educators, because I think they bring a lot to the table too, but just be aware of those inherent biases. And if you feel like you're somehow missing the boat, or you're not doing something right, or, you're just not good at this, just understand the different perspectives and places that people are coming from, whatever it is they're posting online. So,
Seth, I'd like to add to that a little bit, because I agree. And I think that one of the ways that, like, when I look at whether for my own business or whether I want to create a partnership with Launch Control, one of the things that I look for is, because it's fine if someone is selling something that's a business model, and people get a lot of value out of it when it's good, right? But one of the things that I look at when I enter into, let's just use entering in as a partnership from Launch Control, is, are they just selling an outcome? Like, we'll get you $50,000, $100,000, 7 figures, or are they selling a how? Is there a structure behind it? Because if what they're selling is look, I have a step-by-step process for how this works, it will have to be tailored to your market, it will have to be tailored to what you want to accomplish with your business, but we can work together and get you to that endpoint that you want. When there's an actual plan behind it, then that's somebody that I want to work with. When it's somebody that is just talking about pie in the sky outcomes with no how, then I'm leery, right? So if it's something that, you know, somebody or they're looking into people to work with, you know, obviously, like, ask me, we'll give you advice on people that can be, that are great people to work with and can, and certainly be trusted. But if you're just winging it and you're doing it yourself, ask yourself that question: are they actually giving you any insight into how, or are they just telling you what?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like I know it's you know, a lot of the big names or big success stories you hear out there. You know, somebody said, you know, I just made like $60,000 from this one deal. Yeah, that's awesome. And it's totally true. They're not like misstating that, but what did it take to make that $60,000 from that deal? Well, maybe they had to spend $20,000 on direct mail to find the people, talk to a lot of people that said no, you know, dealt with a lot of stuff to get to that $60,000 outcome. And maybe it's not totally evident, you know, from the outside. Oh, okay. To get that 60 grand, I don't just snap my fingers and get it. Like there's a lot that it takes to get there. And I have to be not only have the money to put into that, but I have to be willing to risk that. And it's possible that nothing could come from that. So there's just a lot that goes into that. And um, it's not always that clear when you're just hearing the success story or the testimonial from the outside. So just something to think through.
Yeah.
Cool. So for those of you out there who may be considering getting into this, let's just talk about some basic one-on-one stuff here. So we're talking about which property types to look for. I think there's a lot of stuff you kind of have to think through and questions you have to answer first. One of them is just understanding your budget and its limitations. So if you have, you know, $5,000, I mean, that's a pretty, you know, these days, that's a pretty small amount of money. Not that it's not possible, but if you had $10,000, that's better. But even 10 grand, depending on what type of marketing you're planning to send out and what types of properties you're looking to go after, it doesn't necessarily leave a lot of margin for error. Like you kind of have to do a lot of stuff right. And the reason that's kind of tricky is because when you're starting this business, or starting any business for that matter, those first few months is when you are most likely to make a mistake. And sometimes it can be kind of hard to do everything right when you don't really know what you're doing yet. I mean, you may know the theory, but actually implementing it, there's just a lot of different ways it can possibly go wrong. So whatever amount of money you have, just kind of understand what you will or won't be able to do. If you have 10 grand to work with, that's a very different thing than if you have 50 grand to work with, which is different than if you have 100 grand to work with. And I think, you know, one of the big differences is, I guess, first of all, the types of closing maneuvers you might want to do. For example, like if you did an assignment or a double close in the states where you're allowed to do that, that could enable you to make a lot of money from a deal without ever putting your money into it or having to take title and wait for the thing to sell. But there's some kind of trickiness to doing that. There's it's a little bit of a juggling act you have to do to make that work. Whereas if you had 50 grand, I mean, that totally changes the types of properties you can go after. You would probably have a much easier time taking the deal down yourself without having to find any loans or funders or anything like that. So just kind of understanding what the limitations might be based on the amount of money you have. And also kind of a big, cool change that I've seen in the land business over the past several years now is the availability of land funders. There's a ton of them out there now, which is awesome. Like back when I started this, there weren't land funders. I mean, maybe you could find a rich uncle or something, but nobody out there marketing themselves as, I have cash and I'll help you take down this deal and we can split the profits in some way. Whereas there's like dozens of them now, and they're all a little bit different in terms of the sizes of deals they can do and what the terms of their agreements look like and all this stuff. But it's definitely worth being aware of these different land funders out there, because even if you do have the money on your first, your second, or third deal, you might want to use a funder anyway, just to have them standing over your shoulder and getting somebody else to say, yep, I agree with you. This is a good deal. And it's so good that I'm going to put my money into it. And then when the thing sells, we can divvy up the profits. But it's a really big deal when you consider, especially on the larger properties that might cost six figures or something like that. It's a big, it takes a lot of guts to put that kind of money into a piece of land, trusting that it's going to sell for a lot more, enough to make it worth everybody's while. And even today, like I look at some huge deals and it's just like, man, I'm not that comfortable. Like I have the money, but like I just don't want to put my money into it. But there are funders out there who will happily do this. So I think if you're not aware of these different funders, like become aware of them and have some conversations with a few of them. And even if you don't necessarily need the money, like you might want to try it anyway, because a lot of times these funders can enable you to do deals you'd never be able to do on your own. And it just helps a lot to, even like for your own emotional and mental well-being, to know that somebody else who knows what they're talking about is on board and they agree with you that it's a good deal. Also, I think
Seth, I wanted to go.
good.
Yeah, so I was thinking on that note, because I love that you brought this up, because I feel like the idea of going through a funder, sometimes people shy away from that, and I really think that they should embrace it, especially early on in the process. And another thing is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times the funders will have brokers that they work with, boots on the ground, that can help with getting drone footage, or even going out on site to view the property, and they can kind of give you that local plug-in that you might not have if you're trying to either stand up a new market or even just stand up your primary market if you're more backyard shopping.
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on the funder. I've talked to many different funders, and they all do things a little bit differently. They all kind of have a different set of expectations. Some of them will say, operator is the person who finds the deal. It's your job to get this thing sold. Get on it. Whereas others will say, nope, I'm going to totally take that responsibility. I'm going to find the agent. I'm going to make sure it gets sold. Operator, you're done. Just find the deal. We'll get it closed and I'll handle the rest. So it kind of just depends. I actually think, I mean, just personally, if I was working with a funder and if they were willing to sell the thing and take on that entire job and responsibility, that's awesome. Because that's just a big job to get that done. Even if you are finding a licensed land agent, finding them and managing them can be a big job. So just having a partner who's willing to bear that burden is a really nice asset, I think. And you know, on that whole note of you know, I guess the hesitation of using funders. So the argument that I hear a lot from land operators is that, you know, it makes their cost of capital go way up. But I kind of think they're looking at it the wrong way. They're looking at this as if it's a loan. And for most funders, that's not what we're talking about. This isn't a loan. The funder is taking title to the deal. They're taking on 100% of the risk. And the operator, the only risk they have into that is whatever money they spent on finding the deal in the first place. So whatever their marketing budget was, whatever time they have into that. But aside from that, it's, you know, to have a funder coming in and taking on all of that risk. I mean, the operator's cost of capital is kind of nothing because they're not putting any money into it. If they were like putting in 20% or something, that's a different conversation. But the
Yeah.
ability to have somebody else come in and fund the whole thing, it enables that operator to, you know, have none of the burden and go out and find more deals and keep it going all over again instead of, you know, having to take this deal down and just like wait and sit there and wait until the thing sells. And they're kind of just stuck until the thing sells. So I kind of think it's the wrong perspective to think of it as cost of capital issue, but that's just me.
No, I agree. But Gerald brought up brought up something that I know does worry some people, of somebody just coming in and basically stealing the deal. Right now, I know some really great loan or funding operators that we can suggest, and I'm sure you do as well. That to help kind of alleviate that fear, because the good actors, it's an incredible resource. But I do understand some hesitation of wanting to make sure you find
Yeah, totally. I mean, is it possible? I suppose. I mean, I guess the same thing is possible if you were to work with a licensed agent. I mean, they could steal it too. I mean, anybody could steal anything if they're aware of it. Um, so I don't mean to say that it's like a non-issue, but I think if you're dealing with a reputable funder, and I just put a link in there, landfunding.partners. It's not my website, but that's usually where I'm pointing people to because it's just the best list I know of out there that has most of them there. But just look at the ones that are run by people that you know, like, and trust. people that have a reputation to uphold. Again, doesn't necessarily mean they're above board, but usually they are. And at some point, you have to take the risk if you ever want to explore this. And if somebody ever stabs you in the back, then like put them on your blacklist. Never do business with them again. Now you know you can't trust them, but until they give you a reason to think otherwise, I don't know. I feel like you're kind of just playing the what if game, which believe me, I'm very good at playing that game. But I also know logically, at some point, you have to bring other people into the fold if you want to grow. You have to trust other people. So, yeah, my thoughts on that. And on that whole note of funding, so another thing just to consider is bank financing, which is, I think if you're just starting out, if you're doing your first land deal, if you're buying a property for, 10 grand and selling it for 30 grand, you might not get a lot of banks interested in that kind of thing. But once you've been doing this for, I don't know, a year and you have half a dozen deals under your belt, that kind of thing, you have a track record and you can show you've got a proven business model and you can do it again and again and again. You might want to talk to some banks, preferably some local community banks. I did a podcast interview, RETipster.com/192 with Jay and Daniel. They explained a lot of how they've been able to find banks and bankers. It was pretty fascinating because once you can do that, you can basically just get much better financing terms. And now you are talking about cost of capital because it's a literal loan there, but it's another avenue to consider at some point, and it will enable you to do much bigger deals, and you wouldn't have to necessarily split your profits with a funder. So that's worth thinking about too.
If you get to that point, then you're able to leverage some bank financing. I'll have to listen to it's episode 192, right? I'll have to go back and listen to that. But if you have a portfolio where you're flipping land, but you also have a handful of owner finance situations in place, so you have some consistent monthly income trickling in from those properties, is it easier to line up bank financing if you have that kind of underlying stability?
Yeah, it's a good question. It probably depends on the banker. But I think most bankers are probably looking more at the operator and their history of being able to do deals and how long it takes them to flip the deal, and I guess their confidence in the deal itself. Like looking at one property, and if the operator says we think it's worth 500,000 and we've got it under contract for 250,000, does the banker believe that? And one of the ways they would believe that is, you could get an appraisal. It's not necessarily that foolproof, but really looking at the operators themselves and their financial statement and understanding, like, yes, they know what they're talking about. Look at all these deals they've done in the past in the same market. They've got this figured out. So I think the seller financing thing, maybe I would think the benefit would be more just for a land operator personally, having more consistent, stable cash flow just to support themselves. But a lot of this stuff is case by case, just depends on the operator and the deal and the banker.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Where else were we here? Yeah. Another one is in terms of like which property types to look for in your own budget is understanding the cost of whatever type of marketing you're going to be doing. Again, like 5+ years ago, all anybody ever did was direct mail. It was just dead nut simple. You could send out a terrible, letter template and you'd get deals. Somehow it just work out. It's gotten a lot more competitive and difficult to do that. I feel like you have to have things figured out pretty well, depending on what type of mail you're going to send out. But also now, there's a bunch of different marketing channels that like nobody ever used before. And in a lot of ways, these are way better than direct mail, depending on what you're looking for. Things like texting, for example, it's way easier to track deliverability, and you'll know that whatever messages you sent, like people are getting them now. You don't have to wait 3 weeks to wonder if they ever got them in the first place. Tracking KPIs and stuff like that, it's a lot easier. It's also less expensive to use something like texting or ringless voicemail or cold calling.
Yeah, and sorry to jump in here. One of the things that's really beneficial with text for land in particular is your ability to run A/B testing. And Adam and I will show everybody a quick view of this. a little bit today, and then we're definitely going to deep dive this tomorrow. But let's say that you're looking at a map of whatever state that you want to be involved in, say Florida, and you're looking at that map, and there are, I don't know how many counties in Florida, but you're looking at that county by county heat map, and you want to do some outreach in, say, like 6 or 7 of them, to narrow down the 2 that you want to do direct mail in, right? Because you don't want to do direct mail without some analytics about how well that market's going to perform. So you can use text to set up that initial outreach to figure out, what kind of responses you're going to get, or just how responsive the market is in general. Have a few discovery calls with the owners, see how those go. And then from there, if you're finding a real strength within a market, then you can divert some of your ad dollars into those other more inbound focused marketing, in order to increase your lead flow. But it's a way for you to test markets, which is much more relevant in land than it is in distressed properties. In distressed properties, people usually live in an area, want to drive for dollars in that area, focus on that area. Land investors oftentimes are opening up the continental United States and going, right? And so you want to be able to follow that thought line.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess another thing to be aware of in terms of the whole budget question is understanding what your land investing strategy is going to be. And this is another thing that has evolved quite a bit over the past few years here. So it used to be everybody was following a very simple static business model where we'd send mail out and make super low offers on vacant lots and do nothing to them, and list them for 80 to 100% of market value and sell them, and there you go, do it all over again. But there's tons of different ways people do this now. There's people who do subdivides, and there's people who get land entitlements, and there's people that improve properties, even if that means just brush hogging them, or if it means putting a fence up or putting a driveway in. Like, there's just so many different ways people do this now. And arguably these different strategies are kind of like different business models in and of themselves. Like, somebody who's going after a subdivide has a very different set of assumptions and things that they're willing to do versus somebody who's just doing a straight flip of a $10,000 vacant lot in the middle of nowhere. It's just lots of different stuff goes into each one. And if you are going to be doing one of these subdivide projects, for example, it's probably going to cost more money. It's probably going to take more time. There's just going to be more involved into it, and you'll probably make a lot more in the end as well. But just understanding, like, if we're going to be doing that, we better either have more cash ourselves or have access to the funds from somewhere if we expect that to happen, versus, if I only have 10 grand or something, then I could do a smaller deal, and that's more feasible. So just understanding, when you hear somebody say, I made $300,000 on this deal, we got to understand, okay, what kind of deal was this? Like, was this a subdivide? Like, there's a lot of things we need to dissect to understand what went into making that happen in order for you to say, oh yeah, I can do that too. You got to understand what they had to do to get there. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So which markets to pursue? So there's actually, and I've seen some questions coming in here as we've been talking. There's a blog post and video I put together a little less than a year ago. I just put a link to that in the little chat thing there. It explains a lot of this in terms of like telling you specific states that you're supposed to go to. So we actually ran a poll in the RETipster Facebook group a couple months ago to try to ask people if we were to do a market update podcast episode, which we've done. What states do people most want to hear about? And it was really interesting because some of the top responses were Texas, Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina. I think South Carolina was on there too. But it was really interesting seeing the states that people most wanted to hear about, because it was almost like, oh, okay, I guess that's where most land investors are doing stuff, if that's the places they want to hear about. That doesn't mean you need to go there, but that is the places where a lot of people have been pretty active over the past year or two. And interestingly, these are also states that have had a lot of migration, people going to these states. And this migration has actually slowed down quite a bit over the past, 3 to 6 months. But I can tell you, those states have been pretty active. And, for those who are pretty active in this business, you're probably not surprised when I say those states because maybe you work there as well, or you know somebody else is doing that same kind of thing. But aside from that kind of thing, if you just want to do some quick research to figure out like where would be a viable place to start looking for land deals. So, you know, I always tell people there's deals and opportunities everywhere. So it's not like you have to only follow these narrow paths and end up in the same place. There's deals all over the place. But there are some things you can do to kind of understand statistically where are there more likely to be deals that I can not only find, but that I can also sell in a reasonable amount of time. And this is nothing I made up. A lot of the land investors do this, but one way to do it is to understand the days on market. So how long properties are sitting on the market before they sell. Also understanding the sold to for sale ratio. Some people call this the sell through rate. The same thing. Just understanding, you know, of all the properties of this type that are currently on the market today versus how many of this same type of property has sold over the past year or 6 months or a certain, you know, period of time. And then doing a little bit of math to figure out what the ratio is. Again, check out that video and blog post that explains all this stuff. It's a lot better than I can get into right here. But another just general rule of thumb is to not target big metropolitan areas, but target the areas around those cities. So if you were to look at, you know, a giant city like Dallas, for example, or Houston or San Antonio or Atlanta or something like that, we're not diving into like those cities proper. We're not like going within the city limits. We're almost going to like draw a big donut that goes anywhere from an hour to 3 hour of a drive away from those places. And those are more the sweet spot that we're trying to look in because first of all, there's going to be a lot more vacant land in those areas and they're close enough that people who live in the city could get there with relative ease, but they're not so far away that it's like just remote and nobody can even get there without driving 10 hours. So that's a, you know, a general starting point. And that's, you know, whenever I'm targeting a market, that's almost always what I'm trying to do. So it's another idea to think through. And yeah, there we go. Now, another really critical thing that's kind of boring to talk about, but it's like super important because every deal that turns into a nightmare for a land investor is usually because of a lack of due diligence or just not understanding the most critical items to look at, given that property's geography and the things around it. But yeah, and I guess, by the way, this blog post right here, it's one I wrote years ago. I update it all the time. It's one of the highest traffic blog posts on our site for good reason, because it's just, I list out all the stuff to look through for a vacant lot before you buy it. But one of the things to understand is based on where this property is located, what are the most common problems for vacant land? For example, in Michigan, where I'm at, things like wetlands and perk tests. You know, perk test is needed so you can install a septic tank, which you need to then build a dwelling of any kind if there's not a sewer system there. So those two issues are pretty hot button issues because there's a lot of wetlands in Michigan. And there's also a lot of properties that don't perk very well. Whereas if you're to be looking at properties in Arizona or Nevada or someplace in the desert, wetlands are not going to be an issue there. So like you don't even have to think about wetlands in those areas. But just understanding, you know, based on where this property is located, what are the most common problems? In a place like Arizona, depending on where you're at, you might be looking more at, you know, slope and topography and issues there. Is this property too steep? Or is the soil type one that's going to be difficult to build on given the steepness of the property? And I think if you work in 1 or 2 or 3 markets consistently enough, you'll pretty quickly develop an understanding of what these issues are that you have to pay attention to. But this is just one of those things when you're looking at a property before you buy it, that it's just very easy to get lazy and just not do it. Sometimes this happens not because you're lazy, but just because there's a really weird anomaly problem that is just almost impossible to spot beforehand. But usually it's something that can be seen. You just haven't turned over every rock to see every possible problem. And the good news is there's a lot of answers we can get with free and inexpensive tools online, whether it's something like Google Earth or the land portal or prop stream or data tree or whatever it is you're using. There's a lot of stuff we can figure out there. And even when you hit the limitations of those online tools, which they can take you pretty far just by themselves, but when you get to the point where it's like, okay, I found all the information I can get online, I still need more details to verify this. That's when you would want to find somebody local. So, for example, if it's wetlands, there's actually a lot of information you can get online, whether it's the wetlands mapper, which is not always accurate, but it's one strong clue you can look at. But even my friend David Hansen's telling me about, if you see an area where you think there's wetlands, you could call up a local wetlands scientist or consultant and ask them to take a look at it. And they can look at the property through their eyes as a wetland scientist and tell you their opinion on whether they think there's wetlands there or not without even going there. So you don't have to pay them the full price of doing a big wetland delineation. You can just get their 2 cents on it, and they'll usually have a much better idea than you will, and they can get you an answer pretty quick. So doing that kind of thing. And if you need to hire a local realtor to drive by, get some pictures for you, or hire a drone pilot from a place like Droners or a Thumbtack or something like that to get some pictures from the air. Some people think they don't have to do that until it's time to sell, but I think you should do it, before you buy, because it's a great due diligence tool and a good selling tool once you have that information. And also just thinking about the size of your investment. And this is something I always struggled with when I was buying like super cheap properties, because it's like, I don't want to pay for a perk test when I'm buying this property for $200. Like, this doesn't make sense. And I think when you're buying a super cheap property, you can probably take some more liberties in terms of risks and not getting 100% certain about certain things. But if you are buying like a $500,000, 1,000-acre parcel of land, to develop, put a subdivision together, you should probably be willing to spend a little bit of money on that, because that's a huge roll of the dice if you don't get these answers and get pretty darn certain about what you're getting with that property. So I think whatever property you're buying, you just have to consider, how much am I putting down on this thing? Like, how big of a risk am I taking if I don't get absolute certainty about these things? And you can hopefully kind of use that to guide yourself and make a wise decision on how much you should or shouldn't be spending on due diligence, whether it's drone pictures or perk test or a geotechnical investigation where they test the soil. There's lots of stuff you can do. But again, the size of your investment should sort of dictate how much you're willing to put into that. Any other questions? Where are we at? How are people feeling?
Yeah, so we got quite a few questions here. Let's start with, in terms of, just stick on topic, and then we'll go back up to some of these others.
Yeah.
How do you source info about who the typical end buyer is going to be market to market? So if you're looking in your market and it's very farmland focused, or it is used for a recreational area, or people moving from outside the big city and looking for places to build a single family home within driving distance, like, what kind of research do you put into the end buyer when making a market decision?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, most of the end buyers that I sell to are the end buyer, like the end user is the person who's going to build something on it or do whatever they're going to do with it. But I think if you are doing like a larger subdivide, for example, where you're taking one property and you're going to end up with 20 smaller child parcels. If I was doing that, I might want to start with a builder, because they could possibly just buy everything from me right then and there. And I might have to take a little bit of a haircut on when I'm selling that thing, but at least I can take care of it all in one shot. So I kind of just think through it from the standpoint of who I think the buyer is going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's answering the question, but that's how I think through that.
Yeah, and kind of this also sort of ties in. Justin asked the question: are you saying that direct mail is outdated and maybe overused? I have my answer to this, but I'd like to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I'm not saying that at all. No, it's I think direct mail is still a pretty good starting point. And there's a lot of ways that I've seen direct mail can produce pretty high quality leads, because when you think of what a person has to do, if they get your piece of mail, they have to look at it and be like, okay, I want to do this. They have to pick up their phone, they have to read the phone number and call you, and like they have to actually take some action and move to even talk to you at all. Whereas if you were like texting or cold calling somebody, uh, you're kind of just like meeting them where they are. You're kind of like interrupting their day. I mean, they weren't really looking for you. You just kind of showed up on their phone. They may or may not be in a place where they even want to talk to you. So I think the quality of lead for direct mail can be pretty solid, but the big drawback is, and it's a pretty big drawback, and it's getting bigger, is that direct mail is expensive. And if you don't know what you're doing, and when most people start out, they don't know what they're doing, it can be pretty easy to overspend and just put a lot of money into something that's not going to yield results necessarily, or it's not going to yield results now, because it's going to take weeks to get there, and the person might wait 6 months before calling you back. But to answer the question, I know people who do it both ways. I know people who still do only direct mail and nothing else, and they swear by it because it's a scalable, it works with their life. The results that come back, they're doing the direct mail right in the right markets and saying the right things, and it's working for them. And other people who have totally gone away from direct mail and they're relying totally on maybe a combination of texting and cold calling, for example. And so clearly both can work. And I wouldn't say direct mail is outdated at all. It's just the land investing world has changed where there's other options now, which is ultimately a good thing for all of us. Because if for whatever reason direct mail isn't cutting it, you don't have to just quit. Like there's other things you can try now that are, arguably working better for some people.
Yeah, I think I still think it's very viable. Those are strong inbound leads. It's somebody who's showing motivation, so it's a great starting point for the conversations that you're going to have. But what I think, especially with the rising costs, it's gone from being a volume solution to a targeted strategic solution. So you can use text or cold calling, something that I dub as active marketing versus passive marketing. And you can use those active marketing channels to kind of hone your process and your strategy so that you can then implement direct mail with more of a game plan and less volume. And those deals that come in could potentially be higher profit deals, but you're definitely going to know who you're talking to and what solutions you want to provide to them. So we'll come back to the rest of the questions. I want to give Adam a chance to go into launch control, because this fits exactly with what we're talking about, where you can use launch control as an active marketing tool to really have those conversations in the markets that you've highlighted, figure out what kind of solutions the sellers are looking for, and then from there potentially launch a complementary direct mail campaign that will bring in additional leads for your business. So Adam, if you want to share your screen, we'll run through. We're going to do this as a 5-minute demo, and then we're going to go right back and wrap up with the questions with Seth.
Sure, just a second, please. Okay, you can all see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I will also mention some of the things you talked about briefly. I think I can include it in this very brief presentation. Okay, so I do suggest, and we do advise this to all of our users. So we start with the segmentation right from the get-go, right? So as soon as we build a list, we will try and segment it, either according to the property type or the buyer profile, right? So who are we going to sell it to? Is it a builder? Is it somebody who is going to subdivide it, build single-family homes, use it for farmland? So there are many ways to segment it. Could be, according to the acreage, according to the area. It's all legit. Once the list has been imported, you will see how it's going to be scrubbed for total rows, total prospects, mobiles. You can import up to 3 mobile phones per prospect. Landlines will be scrubbed. This can be quite useful for people who do cold calling as well, because you can download it and then you can hone in, just call the people that you cannot actually text and not call 10,000 people in just a couple of days. Litigators will be scrubbed off, local internal DNC list, and so forth. And one more thing, you can of course use a couple of lists to import it to a single campaign, but you cannot split a list into a couple of campaigns. So we start with this process already here. Then we go to campaigns, and we can kind of continue with that. Here, this is just an example campaign. So campaigns are like folders where we're going to place these lists, and it can help us with both the segmentation and, of course, to kind of keep track of the KPIs. So we have a list here priced. For an example, it's called account. Yeah, there is no county mentioned, but it's just for an example, and it's for, let's say, parcels where we have less than 80 acres. Once you click on it, okay, you cannot see it here, but you can see the KPIs, the number of totally delivered message, response rate, responses, delivery rates, response rates, the number of messages that were not delivered, and total number of leads. I can show you another campaign just for you to see how it looks, actually. So you have a better idea of that. Let's see, do we have it here? Okay, I'll leave that for a bit later so we don't lose some more important stuff. So once you create the campaign, you just go to direct import, click on this blue button and assign it to a campaign. As I said, you can take a couple of lists, assign it to a single campaign, but you cannot split the list into different campaigns. You will be able to keep track of what's going on, how many messages you send, how much remain, how many hot leads you have, how many people put on drips, and deliverability and response rates. The next step is the inbox. So to kind of further differentiate, you can set up your own tags. For instance, here, just for an example, I put a tag for farm, frontage, and water FT, waterfront, right? So you can use, once the prospects start responding, you can just go here, click on a tag. Let's say we would pick one of these tags. Here is frontage, and you can just navigate over here.
So Adam, let me jump in here a little bit. And guys, the reason why this is important is, especially in land, you may be looking at a few different markets, and the sellers may be sitting on different types of land. So, and this is why I was asking Seth the question about the end buyers. So if you are, for a fact that a big stretch of data that you pulled has pretty close to highway access, and you were able to scrub out any landlocked properties with your data provider. Well, you can go into every one of those conversations by using the filter mechanism, and you can know that at the beginning of every day, any deals that you haven't, or leads that you haven't closed out yet and you want to revisit, you filter for those leads. So you're looking in front of you at the screen, you've got 10 conversations that are based on a data set that the property is near a frontage road or a major highway, and you're able to focus your talk track on that conversation and put yourself in the mindset of that seller, which will help you close those deals. Then you can pivot your filter structure, and you can go to, say, like anything that has a access to a lake or a river or some sort of water access to it. Well, now you know what conversations you're having with the seller, and you also know that those are higher value properties. And so you'll know going into that conversation what your potential margins are for each one of those conversations. If you just have an inbox where every potential lead has a different potential parameter to it, it puts you on your back foot. But if you filter properly and you go into these conversations knowing what conversation you want to have, it makes guiding the seller towards your solutions a lot easier. So give yourself that advantage by setting this up in your systems.
Yes, it will keep track, right, of your prospects. You can also leave notes. You can set up reminders as well. Over here, you can, of course, write a note, even write a message that you're going to send to the prospect, select the date. So those are all legit options. What I did notice, I mean, we do advise, if the prospect seems motivated, you like the property, right? getting them on a call as soon as possible, perhaps pushing them to CRM. But what I did notice, and I do inspect a lot of accounts, like I've been through almost every account that we have. What I did notice for land, it's much kind of quicker. The conversion rate is much higher. So if you want to buy a house, the process is a little bit different in some regards. So it takes longer for the prospect to kind of overcome doubt, to trust you. So it's kind of imperative to get him on a phone call, go into a discovery call, talk, more about it, make him trust you, build a relationship. But when it comes to like parcels of land, Seth already mentioned it, people are not really that connected with it. They have no memories or anything like that. So it's very fast. So if they don't want to get on a phone call, you can just, even just through chatting, come up with a deal. And I've seen a bunch of deals come just through a couple of lines of text, just to tell you that, right?
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. I really appreciate that. I want to leave a little more time for the Q&A for Seth to get to any other questions that people had. So, Seth, I'm just going to go back up to where we left off with Justin's question and kind of run down and feed you a few, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Jessica asked, what social media platform do you prefer and why?
Yeah. Well, I think
or platforms, I suppose.
Yeah, Facebook is kind of my one of choice. I don't use Instagram a ton, but I know of other land investors who use that one as well. The thing with social media, though, it's I think the advantage Facebook has is that there's Facebook Marketplace. There's also a lot of buy-sell groups, and I don't know, for whatever reason, the land buying and selling demographic, there just seems to be a lot of that on Facebook for whatever reason. Not that they're not elsewhere too, but it seems to be a fairly centralized place where a lot of land related stuff is happening. So yeah.
We had a question from Riley, which is really more of a launch control question of, do you have tips for which phone number or area code to use in launch control? But I was curious from your perspective, how local you need to be. So, my advice was, as long as smaller states, as long as you're in state, you should be okay. Bigger states, try to be at least from that region. But, from an boots on the ground, so to speak, investor, what would you suggest with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know being within the state, I don't know what it is about that, but it makes a difference. Like when I think of Michigan, it's 616-231-248-313. Like I just instantly recognize all those as Michigan area codes. I don't even know what they are in Indiana or Ohio or Illinois, even though they're like right there. I just don't know. Maybe it's just me and something weird about the way I am. But yeah, I think if you can stay within the state, that's probably ideal. I saw what you were mentioning there. I don't know who typed that about in larger states like Texas, like trying to get closer to the sweet spot. I'm just curious, like, how far do you think is too far, or if it is like just some random area code other side of the country, like, does it kill the whole thing for you, or like, does it make it work 50% worse, or what are your thoughts on that? Have you seen any data to back that up?
I think it's a great question. I get it, and I think it's a really great question for land because in the distressed property market, it does work much better because it is a home. It has more emotional context, like you said, right? If you are investing in the area and from the area, right? Because if you're sending it from an unrecognized area code, it often just sends this idea of, this person's not even from around here. They're running a business. This isn't a one-to-one transaction, right? Whereas with land, most people are not buying from the local area, and it's not, and they say as much on the call with the seller, right? They're from outside the area. But Callan Faulkner is coming on Friday. One of her, like, I don't know if she considers it a catchphrase, but I refer to it often. She said, be a local investor, say you're a local investor without saying you're a local investor. And what she means by that is often like show some knowledge of the local area, even if you're not from there. So I suspect that in a land transaction, it's actually doing some research into the local area, knowing a little bit about the local area so you can speak to it in a way that shows that at least you have genuine interest in that area, and you're not just doing a volume business, I think can be as impactful as the, if not more so, than the area code. Because ultimately, and I know Adam will disagree with me a little bit on this, because I know that a lot of people are taking land deals pretty far via text. Typically, you have to get onto a phone call at some point, right? Typically, you're going to close a deal over the phone and get to terms over the phone. And if in that course of that conversation, you can show that you care a little bit and show that you know a little bit, I think that that can be very helpful.
Yeah, it is interesting because I know some people will filter their lists so that the only property owners who show up on that list are people who live out of state. So they live in a different state anyway, which means the local area code doesn't even matter because that person's somewhere else. So, I mean, I think most people I know will actually do it by people who are in a different county. So it still could make a difference.
Yeah.
But I don't know why I'm drawing this comparison in my mind, but it reminds me of like, when people go to like a prestigious university or something and they think that's going to make all the difference in the world for getting a job in their career, when it's really more like a first impression thing. Like it matters to a point, but what matters a lot more is your competence as an individual and being able to show people that really quick. It's probably a similar thing with this, where it's like you could get away with a weird area code as long as you know how to be relatable and talk like a human.
Yeah, Justin brings up a good point. He said that usually people think it's someone they may know, and I do this, right. I get phone calls from numbers that I don't recognize, and if it's a local number, I might assume it's a delivery. I might assume it's somebody that I know.
Yeah.
And when I hear that telltale pause, I'm like, oh god, it's my bank calling, trying to sell me something. But I'll take that risk often in case it is a call that I want. So that's a good point.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so last chance, guys. Any questions you have, get them in. If not, I'll go back just a second to that QR code that Seth shared for RETipster. If you scan this QR code that's on the screen now, that'll get you over to Launch Control. You can learn more about Launch Control that way if you're not currently a subscriber. Or I dropped a link in the chat to connect directly with our team if you just want to book a time and ask a few questions of the team. They can set you up with anything you need. Let me Seth, I think that you are sharing the screen. So if you want to hop back to that RETipster QR code and give people access to that as well.
I think this is
and
it. Yeah, I think it's.
Oh, okay.
Let me scan. Let's see if it works. Yep, working for me. I believe
Okay.
that's it.
Oh yeah, no, I meant the one you shared earlier on how to self-educate that goes directly to
yes
your page. Yeah.
This goes to the land category on RETipster. RETipster does a lot of stuff that's not land related, but if you want the land specific stuff, this QR code will take you there.
This is a true story. I have a hammock in my front yard, and it's got a nice little garden view. And I will often have coffee in the morning and listen to things on your podcast or read through a blog on RETipster. I have yet to have a question pop into my head regarding land investing and not be able to find the answer on RETipster. So for anybody that's listening in, take advantage of this as a resource, even if you're just doing some light self-education or, like I said in the beginning, gap filling for your business, because if there's misses on RETipster, I'm not aware of them, and I've tried. So
yeah, awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, of course. Jessica asked, how do you go about getting someone on a call when they reply through Launch Control that they only want to be contacted through text? Well, I don't know. That I guess that is somewhat of a situational thing. But I think what most people will do is try to take the next step. What depends on what the next step is. Like, are you doing a set due diligence on the property? in which case that you can do pretty quick. You can fire off the questions that you need to fire off via text and get those answers. But if they are showing legitimate interest in actually going to a negotiation phase or having an agreement sent over, I would suggest just even just calling that number and, ask for forgiveness, basically. Call the number and say, hey, we wanted to move to the phase where I send you over some materials. Want to make sure I dot all my I's and cross my T's. Here's what I'm thinking. I don't think anybody's going to really, react poorly to that call, because at that point it's a wanted business transaction, right? Seth, what would you say? I mean, you're a far more experienced investor than I am.
Yeah. I would actually be a little concerned if they don't want to get on a call. I've talked to a few different people about different like land scams and title fraud and that kind of thing. And that's actually a common red flag, is when you're talking to somebody who's trying to fake like they're the seller, is they don't want to get on a phone call. Not saying that's happened here. It'd actually be probably pretty unlikely, because you already have the number. So that, but yeah, in my mind, I shouldn't say it's absolutely critical, because I have closed pretty big deals through email only before. Like, it's possible, but yeah, I don't know. I would want to talk to them, or at least get something to verify their identity and that kind of thing. Like, I would just be concerned, like, why don't you want to talk on the phone? What's the problem? Like, I would even ask them that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you want to be leery of anybody who isn't taking the sale of their property seriously, and it's not a home, fair enough, but it's still an asset, and you're not going to sell any asset, other than maybe like a bicycle or a microwave without connecting with the seller. Anything that has any real value to it, or the buyer, you're going to want to connect with the buyer. And so, if they're not taking you seriously as a buyer, it should raise some red flags. I would agree with that. Okay, well, everybody who attended today and listened in, I really appreciate it. Like I said, rely on I did it. Rely on RETipster for the education side of things. Make sure you book a call with our team to talk about how to kind of implement some of these educational opportunities that Seth talked about to start outreach in the markets that you choose, and really hone down your strategy within those markets. And then for those of you that want to do even a deeper dive specifically into individual market analysis, we've got the team from Priced coming on tomorrow, Max and Ryan, and they're going to run us through a real deep dive on market analysis and all of the things you need to do once you've pinpointed where you want to start doing your land business in order to get to the point of data pull. And then from data pull, we'll get into A/B testing and really seeing how to get that set up in launch control, so that you guys can start really bringing in some deals. And the last thing I'll say, if you follow that, Seth, can you go back just one more time to that, the other QR code? Yeah. If you follow that and reach out to us, we can get you more information about the rest of Land Week. So everybody knows Seth was on today. We've got the guys from Priced coming on tomorrow. Wednesday is Jaron Barnes from the Land Maverick Society. Thursday, we've got Kevin Rockwood from Pebble REI, which is the leading CRM in the land space. And then we're wrapping things up on Friday with Callan Faulkner, who's going to come on and talk about how to use the newest AI tools to grow and add efficiency to your business. So it's going to be a great week, 1 p.m. Eastern every day this week here on YouTube Live. So keep watching, keep asking questions, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.